Good evening. I'm Tom Shockley, CEO of El Paso Electric, and I want to welcome you to what I think promises to be a very, very special evening, My El Paso. We're going to have some great speakers that we're very, very fortunate to have. El Paso Electric has been a part of this community since 1901. We had a streetcar company that pulled its streetcars with mules. And they say there's a lot of really good stories about Mandy the Mule, but I haven't heard any of them. A year later, we actually had an electric streetcar, and in 1925, we started generating and distributing electricity to El Paso, and that continues till today. But more exciting for us is the promise of being able to be a part of the growth and vibrant activities in this community as we go forward. Tom Lee had special memories of our old streetcars, but more than that, the company had a very, very close relationship with him. In the 1940s, his very best friend, or one of his very best friends, was E.H. Will, and E.H. Will headed up the electric company. And in an opportunity that was really wonderful for us, he donated to the electric company the studies that were done for the pass to the north that is the mural in the historic courthouse. Those studies are now a part of the Museum of Art here in El Paso. Tom Lee's mural has inspired generations of El Pasoans for his depiction of the giants and its inscription. O pass of the north, now the old giants are gone, we little men live where heroes once walked the inviolate earth. After finishing the mural, Tom became an art correspondent in World War II, and he was able to truly see many, many heroes serving in every arm of the military. Tonight, we are here to celebrate and to thank our military for the service to our nation. And at this point, I would like to ask anyone in the military to please stand and let us recognize you. We truly appreciate what you do for us and our country. Thank you so very much. In a moment, we will hear from Dana Patard, Commanding General at Fort Bliss, and from Major General Heidi Brown, Director for Test at the Missile Defense Agency. They both grew up in El Paso and went to El Paso high schools and graduated from El Paso high schools and then on to West Point. And after that, very, very distinguished military careers. We are truly blessed to have them share with us tonight. One thing of interest about both of these generals is that their ties to El Paso, their vivid memories and fondness of this area has kept them very close and tied to our community even when they've been thousands of miles away. We look forward to hearing from them. But before we do that, we have a short presentation from Kay Bailey Hutchinson. Thank you.
El Paso is a place where Ray and I always feel at home. We love visiting our family in El Paso, and I wish I could be with you in this beautiful Plaza Theater tonight. El Paso is also a place where I have strong and committed friends. We've worked together on many things, but among the greatest was ensuring the growth at Fort Bliss. It's hard to believe now that in 1994, the Army relocated the 3rd Cavalry Regiment from Fort Bliss, and many believe the Army had put Fort Bliss on a path toward closure. So many in Washington didn't know what a great asset it is, with McGregor Range, Biggs Army Airfield, and the capability to rapidly deploy to ports and by air anywhere in the world. Making sure Fort Bliss not only survived the Base Realignment and Closure Act, but convincing the Pentagon that Fort Bliss should take on new missions was a community effort with people like former Fort Bliss Commanding Generals Jack Costello and Dennis Cavan, State Representative Dee Margo, civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army, Congressman Reyes, and so many others. When Washington didn't think there was enough water in El Paso to send more troops there, we came up with a solution: a water desalination plant, the largest inland desalination plant in the world. It took a team to make it happen, and I was honored to work with Fort Bliss and El Paso Water Utilities, led by Ed Archuleta, to create a model for the world. I would also like to thank Adair Margot for the opportunity to speak with you tonight and for everything she does for the El Paso community and the Tom Lea Institute. Tonight you'll hear from the Commanding General of Fort Bliss, Dana Patard, who is heading the exponential growth happening there today, and from Major General Heidi Brown, who is the Director of Test for the Missile Defense Agency. Both grew up in El Paso before attending West Point and achieving extraordinary success in their military careers. You know, people talk about there being something in the water of El Paso that helps form accomplished and extremely capable individuals. Tonight, you'll hear from two of the best. You'll also hear a video message from Tom Lea, an El Paso icon your community celebrates this month. I commend the Tom Lea Institute Board of Directors and their supporters for keeping his legacy alive.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am not Lucille Patard. My name is Karen Twitty, and I am proud and honored to stand in for Lucille tonight. Lucille is here, but she had a little surgery, and they weren't sure if those drugs were going to wear off or not in time for this. So please again know that I'm honored to be here to represent her, and proud because she's a dear friend of mine, and we also have so much in common. We're two military brats whose folks retired in Kansas. Two Kansas girls who met handsome, dashing young soldiers and traveled the world. Two proud military spouses who've been all over the world but have fallen in love with El Paso, Texas. So again, good evening. Welcome to my El Paso, one of the crown jewels of Tom Lea Month. As we celebrate our wonderful city this year, there is a strong military tie-in, and rightfully so. After all, El Paso's post-Fort Bliss has been and continues to play a big part in the lives of the citizens of both communities. How many of El Paso's sons and daughters joined the military because of the close proximity to Fort Bliss? And how many husbands and wives joined our ranks as spouses because of the same? My job here tonight is to set the stage in 8 minutes or less about home. As teachers, Lucille and I love to share stories and to help our students make connections about what's taught in the classroom and experiences outside the schoolhouse. So here is Lucille's version of my El Paso. Please hear her voice and her words through me. I'm a proud Kansan by way of Fort Carson, Colorado. You know my favorite motto, there's no place like home. As Army families, and our children in particular, we've lived all over the world, and our kids quickly learn that home is where the Army sends you. It is paramount that our families not only survive, but also thrive. Living the military life, we learn to add water and grow instant friendships. It does an Army mom good when she knows her children are navigating the multitudes of new roads encountered in our transient lifestyles. Their oldest son, Taylor, has bloomed where planted. More importantly, he's put down roots. Before leaving for college at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, Taylor wrote on his Facebook wall, "Going to miss El Paso. Great 2 years of my life shared with some of the best people I know." I firmly believe that from this day forward, when asked where he is from, his response will be like Laura Bush. Taylor, born in Kansas, will claim El Paso as home. Not too bad, considering this boy has moved 11 times and had 13 addresses and is now attending his 11th school in 19 years. Lucille's husband, a soldier, was an Army brat too, a dandelion, one who was born in Okinawa, Japan, but moved shortly thereafter. After many more years, the Patard family was on the move again. But after a 20-year career, his dad retired here in El Paso. Fast forward to 1984, when Lou met the handsome First Lieutenant Pittard from Fort Riley, Kansas. When asked where he was really from, Dana proudly responded, El Paso, Texas. And for the next 27 years, that is the answer Dana gives whenever asked, over and over again. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, it is my honor to introduce to you another one of my favorite people, and definitely Lucille's favorite soldier. He's a wonderful husband, father, and practically a native son. I give you Major General Dana Patard.
Wow, I can see everybody out there. Well, Karen, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. In fact, a surprise today was my wife, Lucille, I think that was mentioned, had foot surgery yesterday morning. In fact, we got up, I think, at 3:30 in the morning and went to William Beaumont about 5 a.m. And I didn't think she was going to be able to come, but Lucille is out there right now, and thank you for being here, honey. Now, it just so happens that with Karen Twitty and her family, my family has known her family for a couple decades through Leavenworth, Kansas, where my godparents, the Hollowells, my Uncle Harry and Aunt Thelma Hollowell lived and knew her family so well. In fact, it was the Hollowell family, my Uncle Harry and Aunt Thelma, who carried me out of the hospital when I was actually born. But what a great event this is. So let's give a huge round of applause for Adair Margot and the Board of Directors at the Lea Institute for putting this together. Now, so much hard work went into this program for so many different people, and it just really shows. You know, it is so awesome to serve, work, and live back in my hometown, commanding the 1st Army Division of Fort Bliss and serving our soldiers, families, and civilians is an honor and a privilege. And knowing that so many people from my childhood are back here in El Paso is really cool too. Now, tonight I would like to view my El Paso by looking at the year 1976. Now, in addition to afros, bell-bottom pants, platform shoes, Earth, Wind, and Fire, Ohio Players, the Bee Gees, and of course disco, 1976 was really a time of optimism, pride, and patriotism, both in El Paso and America. Bicentennial celebrations took hold of the city in honor of the 200th anniversary of our nation. El Paso in 1976 was not my own. It really belonged to all of us. And the story of this city in 1976 is a story of a finite time in a particular place in which ideas thrived and the individuals embraced within the community. So it's not really my El Paso tonight. It is our El Paso. And I'm going to ask for your participation because we're going to have fun tonight talking about our El Paso. 1976 was the last full year also that I actually lived in El Paso for a full year until I returned in 2010. I left here to go to West Point after graduating from Eastwood High School in May 1977. But first, I'd like to talk about how I first came to El Paso, if I could just walk around here. Now, I was born in Okinawa, Japan, as Karen just mentioned. And I was born into an Army family. And we came to El Paso when I was 6 months old. As I've been reminded by a lot of people, they said, "You're not a native, you weren't born here." I said, okay. I got here at 6 months old, as soon as I could. I think that was timing on my parents. You know, we'll have to, I don't know what happened. But again, I was born into an Army family. And my father, Bob Patard, was a career soldier and a captain at the time. My mother, Jackie, was a mathematician. And both of them worked on the Hawk missile systems here at Fort Bliss. In fact, I was surrounded by air defense artillery. I don't know why I didn't go ADA. I think it was something about tanks later in life that just kind of turned me on. But I was surrounded by a loving family. And of course, there was my brother Chris. My brother Chris was the cutest little kid. And I'll tell you, growing up, it's a wonder I didn't grow up with a complex, because we would be going places and people would just stop and say, boy, that's a handsome son. And they turn and look at me and go, are they brothers? So I learned early in life that I wouldn't be able to rely on my looks for success, because I wasn't really the cutest kid in the world. But I have vivid memories of the first time we were in El Paso, between 1959 and 1962. We lived in the Van Horn housing area on Fort Bliss, and that housing area we just demolished about a year ago. But after I took over as commanding general, we were supposed to demolish it earlier. And I said, I want to take my mom to see where we lived on Ponder Road in Van Horn, and we did go there. And then we demolished it. But it's going to be rebuilt. It's going to be rebuilt. But I remember those times. We had two housekeepers, Maria and Luz Maria. I never knew their last names, but I just knew them as ma'am. And when both my parents worked, and when they worked, my brother was first in nursery school and then in kindergarten. And for those of you who don't know what nursery school is, that's what preschool was back then. I was taken to a friend's home, Mrs. Helen James. I think is here tonight. Mrs. James, are you here? Oh, there she is. Thank you for being here, ma'am. In those days, Mrs. Helen James helped to raise me while my parents worked. And I remember a particular time, and this was, I guess, when I was back at Van Horn housing area. Again, I was just a 3-year-old. I was playing outside with some friends, and I remember pulling on the ponytail of a little girl, and she started crying. She ran inside. Well, next thing I know, her father came out. And of course, I started running. And he said, "Stop!" And he had kind of an Eastern European accent. It almost reminds me of Arnold Schwarzenegger in a way. He was a big guy. He said, "Did you pull my daughter's hair?" And I went, And I said, like, me sorry. And then he hit me. I was a 3-year-old child. He turned and hit me in the arm. And of course, I just cried, wailed, and went home. And I remember looking back, and he threw a rock at me. So I got home, we had a housekeeper there, and about 20 minutes later, my mom came home normally, we just, "Mom, what is that?" And then she called my father, and my father came home. To this day, I've never seen him so mad and upset. And he went over to the house with the military police. And within 7 days, this is the discipline of Fort Bliss, that family was moved out. Was moved off of post. And I don't know what action was taken. I know he was a warrant officer at the time. I don't know if he had a bad day or what. But I kind of learned 3 things out of that. One was, my dad to me was larger than life after that. He could do no wrong. He was my hero. Number 2 was a great respect for the MPs. And to this day, whenever I see the MPs, I wave. I think now in Fort Bliss, they think I'm waving just because I'm the commanding general. But I'm waving because of being that little 3-year-old boy who was very appreciative. And then I think 3, I have not pulled a girl's hair since that time overall, El Paso. Well, in 1962, my father got orders to go to Korea. And we then left El Paso. We moved in with my grandparents in Philadelphia. So we didn't return to El Paso again until 1969. In that 7 intervening years, we moved to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Long Island, New York, and then Missouri, and then Oregon, and returned to El Paso in 1969. To me and my family, El Paso was like this promised land. Wherever we went, we saw different things. Racism in America, problems that we saw in school where I was called the N-word at different places. And my parents would tell my brother and I that, El Paso is not like this. That is where we'll go. One day we'll be back in El Paso. And I remember that as we got closer and closer to coming back to El Paso, we were so happy about coming back to this promised land. Now, again, El Paso wasn't absent of the racial baggage that was throughout America, but it just wasn't the same. And really, right here on the stage last year, our former First Lady, Laura Bush, also mentioned that with her family, when they came to El Paso and were stationed at Fort Bliss, they knew that this was the place that they wanted to live. And to them, this was also the promised land. It was interesting that she mentioned that, because we felt the same way in the years before 1969. So now it's 1969. In 1969, we moved back to El Paso and got integrated into the community. I attended Edgemere Elementary School, Eastwood Heights Elementary School, Eastwood Junior High School, and then Eastwood High School. Yay, I get some classmates out here, troopers, and raiders from the EJHS. But I had so many friends growing up. And between our classmates, neighbors, friends, and family members, it was such a positive environment to be raised in. And there were also here in El Paso was this small but vibrant African-American community. And it wasn't very large, but the African-American kids my age were kind of all around El Paso, primarily in about 6 different high schools, about Austin, Andress, Bel Air, Burgess, Eastwood, and Parkland. And most African-American kids had some kind of connection to the military. Most of us who were in high school would go to the teen club at Fort Bliss on Friday nights after football games. And that's how we all got to know each other. To this day, I know so many people at Andress and Burgess and Bel Air and other schools, kind of primarily because of that. Many of us knew each other through our parents, especially our parents who were in the black fraternities or sororities. We attended the same picnics and dances. And our parents, or one of the ways we got to know each other was through the church. And my family attended Center Chapel on Fort Bliss, which I am so proud to be attending today, since it's right across the street from my house on Fort Bliss, back in those days. And where we lived at the time, my family lived in East El Paso on Allway Drive, off of Yarborough Boulevard, Yarborough Drive, just a couple streets up from Montwood. In fact, there was Montwood Square there, if you know. There's an Albertsons there where I used to be a bagger, courtesy clerk. I was a professional. I was a courtesy clerk. And to this day, and Lucille's always embarrassed when I do this, but if I'm in an Albertsons, I will inspect the courtesy clerks and just say, one day, that was back in the day. It was influenced by a lot of people. Because of my mom in 1976, and my mother is here. Mom, thank you for being here tonight. Cool. I got to give my brother props. My brother flew in today from San Antonio. Thank you for being here, Chris. But my mother was the president or the basileus of the local chapter of the Alpha Kappa Alpha in 1976. So we were surrounded by adoptive aunts and uncles. I must have called, I was looking at a list, I think I called 15 different people, uncle and aunt, in El Paso. It was this supportive community overall. It was also influenced by neighbors. Across the street from us was an Irish Catholic family, the McGinnis family. And it so turned out, by coincidence, we had no idea of this on Allway Drive until Mrs. McGinnis showed up one day with a yearbook. And my mother said, "Oh, you found my high school yearbook. Where did I lose it?" And she looked at my mom and said, "Jackie, it's Marion." It turned out that my mother and Mrs. McGinnis, living right across the street from us, had graduated from high school together in 1944 in Philadelphia. And they had actually been friends. Well, then their son, Kevin McGinnis, and I also went to Eastwood together, and we became great friends. Again, the influence of people in this supportive community made such a difference. And also, as a part of the African-American community, one place that you always got information was Estine's Barbershop. at Piedras and Alameda, everybody had to get their afros just perfect through Esteem. And I don't know if Esteem's here tonight, but I thank you. I thank you for, in fact, I probably should have got my haircut with you today, instead of where I went. It was such a supportive community. And I agree with a person who was like my little sister at Eastwood, and that's Wisa Davis. Wisa Davis often says, yes, that was her back at Eastwood, often says or recites the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. And she talked about her own childhood here in El Paso. And I agree, the same thing. And I'm so proud of Wisa because Wisa, through this communal support and everything else, became the first black female judge here in El Paso. And Wisa, thank you for being here tonight. But back to 1976. In fact, in 1976, I was elected student body president of Eastwood at a time when Eastwood High School had nearly 4,000 students. It was the largest high school in El Paso and one of the largest high schools in Texas. It was an amazing time to be at Eastwood at that time. Oh, we can take down that picture. Oh. But as we set the scene for 1976, 1976 El Paso at that time, I was 17. And at that time, it seemed like we could be anything, do anything, accomplish anything that we set our minds to. We certainly felt that way. It seemed like the sky was the limit. El Paso was this community that it was just so promising back then. And it probably still is today, but back then it certainly was. And it was a community where diversity and differences was in fact celebrated, and you could be an individual. And in some ways, El Paso, we missed some of the cynicism of the 1970s. And we had it here, but in some ways we missed some of the cynicism of the 1970s. Now, the environment here, we weren't naive. We understood that, yes, there was hatred and racism in our American society, but there was a feeling that that is something we could overcome, and I felt like we did. So tonight, as we tell the story of, I say my El Paso, it's really our El Paso, and I like to tell it through a number of contemporaries in 1976 who were a part of that time period. Dr. Jim Bowden, Oscar Leeser, Governor Susana Martinez, Admiral Sam Pettis, Judge Mark Carter, Gus Rodriguez, and Major General Heidi Brown were all a part of that community in high school there in 1976. And their story is, in many ways, our collective story. You know, my wife, Lucille, as Karen Twitty mentioned, this is my beautiful wife, Lucille, often, because she's from Kansas, just like Karen Twitty, often recites what Karen Twitty recited, which is the Wizard of Oz saying of, there's no place like home. And that's how I feel about El Paso. And so many of us from that 1976 era feel about El Paso. There's no place like home. Admiral Sam Perez, whose mother is here tonight. Ma'am, I know you're here. Mrs. Perez? She's there in the back. Thank you. Well, Admiral Sam Perez, who spent over 30 years in the Navy, has been to all over the world in many historic places, always finds a way to come back home. Home is where the heart is, and home for so many of us is right here in El Paso. In fact, when my family moved around for that 7-year intervening years, we moved to different places. We know we lived in Philadelphia, we know we lived in Oregon, but it was El Paso. El Paso was our home. And as we look back at many of contemporaries, we had mentors, people that inspired us, who looked out for us. And for any, I think, successful El Paso or successful American, you need someone who can inspire you, who can point you in the right direction, who can, in some ways, give you the tools to help you be successful later in life. For me, that started out with my parents. My father retired from the Army, as mentioned before, right here in El Paso. And both my parents were hard-working Americans who wanted a better life for both my brother and myself. And they passed on that work ethic also to us, especially my brother. In fact, my brother is one of the hardest-working attorneys in San Antonio that I know of, and he's a very successful attorney, and I'm glad he's here tonight. In 1972, when I was going to Eastwood Junior High School, one of my early mentors was my 7th grade English teacher, Mr. Art Shaw. Mr. Shaw gave all of us a hard time. Some of us remember that who are here. But he was a great teacher. He saw something in me that I certainly didn't see. In fact, he selected me as the assistant editor of the yearbook, and again, I don't know why, my 8th grade year. And in that year, I was selected as Mr. EJHS, Mr. Eastwood Junior High School, which for me was the greatest honor in my life up to that period of time. Again, I credit Mr. Art Shaw for seeing something in me that I didn't see myself. And we talk about coincidences. The coincidence with Mr. Shaw was so amazing. And I found this out through him when he brought in a yearbook from his high school. And he showed me the teacher, his favorite teacher. Well, he went to high school in Okinawa, Japan. His favorite teacher was his math teacher, Mrs. Jackie Patard. So, in some ways, he was repaying the debt from my mother onto me. But I know I'll always, always certainly appreciate that. Now, my late father, Bob Pittard, who died last year and is buried in the Fort Bliss National Cemetery, was obviously my inspiration for joining the Army. But I guess it's, in some ways, it's kind of mysterious how things can affect you. And one thing, I had an epiphany in 1969 after looking through the July 1969 National Geographic. Now, I wasn't the most studious student, so I was actually looking through National Geographic because in those days I was looking for scantily clad natives. We didn't have Playboy back then, so I'm just keeping it real. But in that particular issue, there was this picture of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, and this is the picture right here, where he was sitting at this big table with all these marshals and generals and admirals. There's Field Marshal Montgomery, Air Marshal Tedder. And you can't see General Omar Bradley's over there, General B. Dale Smith. And this was right before D-Day. Something about this picture just hit me. I said to myself, that's what I want to do. And with hard work, maybe, possibly, I could do that. I was in the 4th grade when I said that. And at that time, I said, I want to go to West Point. And again, I was in only 4th grade, but I was very serious. So I convened a meeting with my parents in our backyard. And I was very serious and said, Mom and Dad, I want to go to West Point. And what they could have done is laughed and said, boy, get back in the house. But they didn't. They encouraged me. And that's amazing for that time, because that was 1969. There were only a handful of African-American graduates from West Point. But my family supported me. And my dad kept me on the track a little bit. He helped me with my paperwork and getting the application. And probably most importantly, he got in touch with Colonel Buster Hayden. Now, the late Colonel Buster Hayden was a legend. He influenced me so much, me and Heidi Brown and so many of us. In fact, he has the record for West Point in the academy for having the most candidates ever to enter West Point, and that's over 300, all from the El Paso area, from Colonel Buster Hayden. And Heidi Brown and I, and a number of us, Paul Divis or a number of us, were really his first class in the fall of 1976 to get chosen to go on to West Point in 1977. And I believe tonight that Colonel Hayden's widow, Sugar Hayden, and her son Chris are here tonight. Thank you. Thank you for being here. The legacy of your husband lives on through so many of us. We are sons and daughters in many ways of Colonel Hayden. Another mentor was Major General Edward Greer, who I know, who's known me most of my life, and who I affectionately know, he and his wife, as my Uncle Ed and Aunt Jewel. General Greer was one of the first 10 African-American general officers in American history. And he retired to El Paso in 1976. He's right there. Thank you for coming tonight. Well, after retiring in El Paso in 1976, he sought me out, and he encouraged me in my junior and senior years at Eastwood about West Point and the Army. And just listening to him and his stories from World War II and Korea and Vietnam were amazing. And 4 years later, in 1981, he flew to West Point to pin on my second lieutenant bars, and I'll always appreciate that. So thank you very much. And by the way, when I left El Paso in 1977 to go to West Point, my mother did too. Long story short, I'm not even going to tell that story, but I graduated from West Point in 4 years. My mother stayed 30 years as a Department of the Army civilian working at West Point. And she's now back with us, back in Texas, now living with us at Fort Bliss. But my mother is one of my lifetime heroes who's always inspired me. And it's mentors that have made such a difference, certainly in my life, and made a difference in the lives of so many people. Tonight I'm going to say, my El Paso, our El Paso. And what I'd like from you, from participating in the crowd, is when I say my El Paso, I'd like you to respond with our El Paso. Are you ready? All right, let's try it. My El Paso, our El Paso. All right. One person who really mirrored kind of what I was doing was Jim Bowden. And Jim Bowden and I went to high school together at Eastwood. He was a year ahead of me, and he was on the varsity basketball team. And anybody who says white men can't jump, they didn't know Jim Bowden. Jim Bowden was one of the leaders on the Eastwood basketball team that took the state championship in 1976, the first time in 60 years that a high school from El Paso had won the state championship in basketball. That meant so much to so many of us. In fact, many people will tell you what they were doing at that time when that occurred. I was not on the team, but I was such a big fan. And hundreds of students and parents and well-wishers went to Austin, Texas for the state championship tournament. And it was such a great day when that occurred. In fact, in the semifinals, I think Gilbert Shepard hit the buzzer beater to turn the game into overtime, and then Jim Bowden shot the winning shot, which brought them to the championship, and then they won. Amazing. And what Jim Bowden has said is that experience of success has really propelled him through life. Being a part of something bigger than self, and knowing that from hard work you can succeed. And even 36 years later, people stop me and Jim and others and talk about that Eastwood State Championship basketball team. It was big, not just for Eastwood, it was big for El Paso. And it looks like, I guess, a film or movie is being developed to chronicle that state championship. Well, Jim went on to UTEP and then played for the legendary coach Don Haskins of Glory Road fame. And after playing basketball at UTEP, he went on to dental school and became a dentist with a dual specialty of dental, pediatric dentistry, as well as orthodontics. And I believe Dr. Jim Bowden is here tonight. Jim, thank you for being here. And to this day, he and I do CrossFit every Saturday morning in a gym in his house. And he's still in good shape. My El Paso, our El Paso. Oscar Leeser. Oscar Leeser, who is in charge, who's head of Hyundai of El Paso, which is the 4th largest Hyundai dealership in the nation, had a different background than Jim Bowden. Oscar Leeser was a poor immigrant from Mexico, and he became a successful business leader here in El Paso. Oscar Leeser went on to Coronado High School after his family had immigrated here in 1967 from Chihuahua, Mexico. And he was 9 years old when he came here and didn't speak any English. And what helped him in his transition was sports as well as his school. And one thing that he said is that he never felt like he was never a citizen because the people of El Paso were so giving and welcoming. In 1976, Oscar Leeser was 18 years old and was a senior at Coronado High School. But more importantly that year, that's the year he became a citizen of this nation. And what Oscar Leeser would tell you is that he felt like El Paso, this was the land of opportunity. And if he could do it, anybody could do it. My El Paso, our El Paso. Governor Susana Martinez, who was the first female governor of New Mexico and the first female Latina governor in American history, came from this land of opportunity. It was in 1976 when she made the decision to quit the Riverside cheerleading squad and run for student body president. And she told her teachers and her fellow students that she wanted to be a public official and run for elected office. Well, she obviously won. I first met Susana Martinez in 1976. We were both student body presidents of our schools. And as student body presidents, we had to meet with the superintendent of the Ysleta Independent School District, the legendary Dr. J.M. Hanks, every other month. And in those meetings, I was always so impressed with Susana's sharp mind, her preparation, her organization, and she was very attractive too, I might add. Susana Martinez, Governor Susana Martinez is smart, she's ambitious, and even back then we knew that. And I remember in Austin, Texas, in 1976, there was this Texas-wide meeting of all the student council presidents throughout the state. And she told some people at that time, hey, I would like to be the first woman president of the United States. And some people actually laughed. But I'll tell you, they're not laughing now. Governor Susana Martinez never forgot that incident. And to this day, she still talks about it. Because that incident helped to sharpen her resolve. And you know what? She could be our first female president. I would vote for her for sure. My El Paso! Cool. In 1976, Admiral Sam Perez was a senior at Cathedral High School. And I believe his mother's here tonight. Yes. Thank you. He worked hard. He was from Canutillo. His father was a propane plumber and a farmer, and his mother was then, and still is, a bookkeeper. And on summers, he used to work the farm every summer, worked hard. And he went to Canutillo Junior High School, and at that time, the school board in Canutillo did not pass their school bond. It was a very poor district at that time. You never know if you go there now, but back then it was a very poor district. And in fact, for the high school, they had to use the same building as the junior high. So high school students started class at 5 a.m. in the morning until noon in the same building. And then the junior high students started at 1 p.m. and ended at 7 p.m. at night. That's just not poor. That is po. And that's the environment Sam Perez came out of. But So he was working on a farm in the summertime, and that's when he had his epiphany. He had an epiphany at 120 degrees on that tractor and said, I can see myself doing this to the age of 50. And if I don't get an education, I'm going to do this until I die. He quietly put down the load, parked the tractor, and told his mother that. He said, I need to go to Cathedral High School. Well, it so happens that summer, with his high marks from Canutillo Junior High School, he was accepted to Cathedral High School. Same school as my two sons go to. And of course, Admiral Sam Perez then went on to the Naval Academy and has had an amazing career in the Navy. On September 11, 2001, as a naval commander, he was working in the Pentagon when the planes hit. And ironically, nearly 10 years later, he was the admiral in charge of the aircraft carrier task force, the Carl Vinson, where Osama bin Laden was taken after he was killed. And in fact, he was one of the last Americans to see Osama bin Laden. How about that? My El Paso, our El Paso. Cool. Again, there's so many contemporaries from 1976 that come to mind. One that comes to mind is Mark Carter. Mark Carter and I have known each other seemingly forever. He and his twin brother, Mike, who is here today. Mike, thank you for being here. Well, we grew up together in many ways. They went to middle school together, and they lived around the corner. And again, Mark was very smart. One thing that my parents had, we had this pool in our backyard. So it was party time at the Patard house for pool parties. But it'd be interesting when Mark Carter would come through, he would knock on the door and show up in his swim trunk and say, hey, what do you want to do? It's like, all right, I guess we're going swimming, Mark. Mark, Mike, and I graduated from Eastwood together. And they both went on to UT Austin, and were both Army officers. And Mark went on to law school, and now he's a district court judge in Houston, Texas. But not just any district court judge. He's a very good district court judge. In fact, he helped to create this concept of the Veterans Court. And the Veterans Court helps our veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq who find themselves in minor scrapes with the law. And in some ways it gives them a break, a discipline break, but it is amazing. And it's something that is getting different places in the country are following Judge Mark Carter's lead. And this Sunday, on the CBS News show 60 Minutes, you will hear Mark Carter talk about that. How about that? My El Paso, our El Paso. And Gus Rodriguez. Gus Rodriguez and I went to rival high schools. That's the Gus Rodriguez I remember. We had many of the same common friends. He went to Burgess High School and hung out in many of the same places. Of course, Gus Rodriguez became really a great businessman. He's the Director of Operations for Beacon Services and a former chairman of the Greater El Paso Chamber of Commerce. In fact, in 2004, he was nominated for and selected as the Citizen of the Year of El Paso. And I'd like to announce tonight that next week, Gus Rodriguez will be inducted into the El Paso Business Hall of Fame. How about that? And Gus is here tonight. Where are you, Gus? Gus, there he is. My El Paso and your El Paso. The El Paso of 1976 really is a symbol. It's a time that no longer exists, but really still inspires, especially those of us who emerged from it. I am so proud to be an El Pasoan and a soldier. After nearly 35 years and visiting over 75 different countries, and after many operational and combat deployments, I have finally returned home here in El Paso. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate tonight. I love this city and its people. El Paso is probably the friendliest place in the world. And El Paso is a place where diversity is celebrated and dreams can be achieved. God bless you all for being here tonight, and God bless this community, our El Paso. And please remember our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, and Coast Guard, who right now are in harm's way defending our freedoms. Thank you so much for coming here tonight. Thank you. And now, it is my distinct honor for me to introduce Major General Heidi Brown. Now, she was an important part of 1976 El Paso, and I, as I mentioned before, first met her in 1976 when she was at Austin High School. I remember her as smart, organized, and just a great swimmer. In fact, I tested that out when we both went to Command and General Staff College as majors. She convinced me to be in my first triathlon. She said, "Oh, the swimming is easy." We started out together. That's the last time I saw her in the race. And she just blew me away. And we have a common bond through the late Colonel Buster Hayden that remains to this day. We were West Point classmates, what was only the second class with female cadets in West Point history. We have remained friends and been in touch all these years. Now, Major General Heidi Brown wanted to be here tonight so badly, but she cannot be here tonight due to a very important missile defense test that she's conducting in the Kwajalein Island in the Pacific Ocean. Now, while she can't be here in person, she will speak to us through video. Ladies and gentlemen, Major General Heidi Virginia Brown.
Thank you very much, Adair, for allowing me to be a part of tonight's presentation. Thank you to all the organizers of this event. I'm very sorry that I could not be physically with you all this evening, but as you can see, we have an important missile defense test being conducted at Kwajalein Atoll in the South Pacific. In preparation for tonight's Tom Lee Month keynote event, I reviewed the presentation former First Lady Laura Bush gave last year. I was struck by her passion, her memories of El Paso, and her genuineness. And while I have lived in a lot of different places over the last 31 years serving in the Army, my thoughts always seem to return to my Texas roots and my upbringing in El Paso. As an Air Defense Artillery officer, my travels have often led me back to El Paso until the base realignment and closure decision May 13, 2005. But it hasn't changed my love for my El Paso, the history, the beauty, Fort Bliss, and above all, the people in this community. Like former First Lady Bush's family, my parents decided to settle in El Paso after my father was stationed here twice. Both of my older brothers had asthma, and the dry heat is something many talk about as being the great healer. In many respects, I believe that there is great truth in that. The first house I ever lived in was on Catnip Street on the east side of El Paso. Back then, the east side of El Paso had a definite border to it, as the back of the houses across the street from ours was a desert, but later became a golf course. I went to Scottsdale Elementary School and have very fond memories of my first grade teacher, Mrs. Oldner. I had my first boyfriend in first grade, Billy Juvrud, who used to shower me with exquisite paper jewelry. I lost touch with Billy for a number of years once we moved to Central El Paso, but as fate would have it, our paths would cross when we both swam for the same swimming team years later. I was baptized at All Saints Episcopal Church, and the Brown family, consisting of 6 children, were regulars at Sunday school. But as the family grew, that house was way too small for us, so we moved to a very different part of the city, Memorial Heights. We lived on Wheeling Avenue, and 5 of the 6 of us went to Crockett Elementary School. All 6 of us graduated from Stephen F. Austin High School. My father was born in Barnett, Vermont, but grew up in Dover, New Hampshire. He was an orphan and the youngest in a large family. My father would tell us little about how he grew up, but rather would focus on how he was determined to make a better life for us than he had. On the day he graduated from high school, he went back to the orphanage to spend the night. However, he was greeted at the door, handed a cardboard suitcase with all of his belongings packed inside, told to take off the suit he was wearing as another boy would need it, and to be on his way. He asked if he could at least stay for dinner, and he was told no. My father fought in both World War II and in the Korean War and was awarded a number of medals for valor. I learned more about what my father did in combat reading his obituary than I ever knew while he was alive. He was and is the bravest and humblest person I have ever known. When he retired from the Army, he and my mother settled here, and he would earn both his bachelor's and master's degrees at what was then Texas Western University, and now the University of Texas at El Paso. He retired from the military the year before I was born, was a teacher and later an assistant principal in the El Paso Independent School District. This would be a bit of a challenge for me personally, as the time between my acting out in front of a teacher and my father finding out could be measured in seconds. In the Army, we call this the flash to bang time. Now, when I say acting out, by today's standards, my infractions wouldn't even be worth mentioning. What did I do? Well, in 4th grade, I said yeah to Mrs. Birch. I promptly had my mouth washed out with soap when I got home from school that day. My mother was a remarkable woman. She was and is the smartest person I have ever known. She graduated from Leavenworth High School in 1938 as valedictorian. She graduated summa cum laude from St. Mary's College in 1942 with a quadruple major and minor. During World War II, my mother volunteered for the American Red Cross and was assigned to the China-Burma-India Theater. She spent 1 year in China at advanced airfields of the Army Air Forces in Kunming, Chengdu, and Guiyang. Upon her return from China, she entered Columbia University, from which she was awarded a master's degree in international relations in 1947. Following her graduation from Columbia, she entered special services and was assigned to Germany, where she worked in Grafenwehr, Bad Neuheim, and Regensburg, establishing service clubs and assisting displaced persons and refugees. She also observed several sessions at the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal. It was at Regensburg where she met and married a young captain named William G. Brown. My mother could have chosen a variety of professions, but was perfectly content to devote her life to raising the Brown brood. However, she still dabbled at one of her many talents that this audience would appreciate: art. She would doodle when she would talk on the phone, and I remember looking at things she drew. She would draw models in different attire, or sketch something resembling one of the great wonders of the earth, the beauty of the Franklin Mountains, or a different landscape from a memory. Sometime during those years of growing up in El Paso, while associated with the Amateur Athletic Association swimming, the city of El Paso was looking for a mascot as part of their campaign to encourage children across the city to learn to swim. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with Gus and Goldie, but those 2 characters were born on a scratched piece of paper by the telephone in our kitchen. Before the Memorial Park swimming pool changed from an outdoor pool to the indoor pool of today, Gus and Goldie were painted on one of the walls on the outside of the pool. When the movie Glory Road came out, my mother would often tell stories of that incredible time in 1966. The players, the coach Don Haskins, and the impact the team had on El Paso, as well as the United States. I have very fond memories of attending Austin High School. I was in both the band and the orchestra. I started out playing the flute in 5th grade, but in my sophomore year at Austin, I switched to French horn because there was a lot less competition to be in both the band and the orchestra. I also was in the National Honor Society, Math Club, Spanish Honor Society, swam for the high school, was in Cherami, a high school sorority, Holidays, a social group with membership from all the high schools in El Paso, Sigma, a Tri-High Y, by the way, it spells amigos backwards, and a few other extracurricular activities. To say that I stayed busy in high school was an understatement. I worked a couple of summers at Memorial Park Swimming Pool as a lifeguard. It never seemed like work as I enjoyed being around the water and loved teaching children and adults how to swim. I met a wonderful guy the summer going into my junior year of high school, Ed Figueroa. Ed was a football player at Coronado High School. That following year, his senior year, he was tragically killed in a car accident. He was selfless and humble and one of the finest El Pasoans I've ever met. That same year in 1976, and Dana talked about it earlier, was when I was introduced to Colonel Retired Buster Hayden. He was the liaison officer to the United States Military Academy at West Point. When the military academies opened to women the summer of '76, I thought that I would apply, never realizing I had even a serious chance of being accepted. Colonel Hayden was very confident in me, and interestingly enough, as he got to know my family, it turned out that he actually knew one of my uncles extremely well, as they had both attended West Point in the 1940s. Buster played a tremendous role in my life starting in '76. Last year he passed away, but he's still keeping an eye on me from above with my parents. I would certainly be remiss if I didn't mention that I met Dana, my fellow El Pasoan, Texan, classmate, and friend. And you here in the El Paso community are blessed to have him and Lucille in your community. Strength is one, my friend. One of the most incredible experiences that I didn't fully appreciate back then, but certainly have over the years, was the opportunity to meet the last five-star general of any service, General Omar Bradley. He lived at Fort Bliss, just down from William Beaumont Hospital. Every Christmas holiday period, when the cadets from El Paso who were attending West Point came home to spend the holidays with their families, Buster arranged that we would meet with General Bradley. It was truly remarkable. When the Iranian hostage situation took place in 1979, I remember my mother telling me that the El Paso Electric Company and the city of El Paso had decided that they would keep the Star on the Mountain lit until they were released. I doubt anyone thought that they would be held hostage as long as they were, and I'm sure the electric bill for the Star was astronomical. But this is another demonstration of who El Paso is. When the hostages were released, one of their first stops was to West Point, and as fate would have it, I was there. And when they came into the cadet mess hall, we gave them a standing ovation. They deserved it, as did El Paso, for holding firm to your commitment to keep that Star lit. That Star on the mountain that no doubt is lit tonight is a beacon for all to see. You can see it for miles and miles. And when you do, you know you're coming home to El Paso. Upon graduating from West Point, I chose the Air Defense Artillery branch, which at the time was primarily located at Fort Bliss. I used to always get asked if I did that, so I would always return to El Paso. The answer is no, but certainly I made the right choice. Up until the base realignment and closure decision in 2005, all roads in my life frequently led me back to Fort Bliss and El Paso. I attended my basic course here in 1981, as well as my advanced course in 1986. I returned in 1997 to take command of a battalion, returned again to take command of a brigade in 2002. My last tour here started in 2005 and lasted 3 years, while I served in a variety of positions, including the Chief of Staff, Fort Bliss, Deputy Commanding General, Fort Bliss, and Assistant Commandant, Air Defense Artillery School. So you can see it's true, my path has always led me back to El Paso. I took command of 2nd Battalion, 43rd Air Defense Artillery Regiment on 30 September 1997 at Fort Bliss, Texas. This was a watershed moment for the Air Defense Artillery, as I was the first woman to command a tactical battalion, a combat arms battalion, in our branch. I deployed the battalion to Southwest Asia in October 1998, and we provided air and missile defense coverage during 2 operations in both Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, Operation Desert Fox and Operation Desert Thunder II. Again, the support from the community was tremendous towards our soldiers and their families. These 2 operations resulted in no U.S. casualties, and we were welcomed home as heroes from a very successful deployment. Later in the summer of 2002, I returned to Fort Bliss in El Paso. My father had been very ill over the last year, but he kept reassuring me that he would be alive to see me take command of the 31st Air Defense Brigade in July. 2 days before I took command of the brigade, my father went to the VA hospital for a routine checkup. It was everything but routine. He was admitted to the hospital, placed in the intensive care unit at William Beaumont, and was being treated for a number of issues. This was a Wednesday. On Friday morning, the morning that I would take command of the brigade, my father was given a day pass from the hospital, transported by ambulance to my ceremony at Knoll Field at Fort Bliss with an emergency medical technician and a doctor in tow. After ceremonies of this type, it was traditional to move to the Officers Club for a reception. My brothers and sisters and I convinced the doctor to allow my father to attend the reception. At the reception, my father noticed trays of hot food being moved through the hallway to another room within the club. Since my ceremony was in the morning, the fare that I had chosen was mostly cold breakfast food with a few hot items. When my father saw what looked like lunch food, he made a few comments to me that he would have liked to have had that menu rather than mine. I would remember this when selecting the menu items for my father's reception following the memorial service we held upon his death less than a month later. Some of the most difficult times in my life have been softened by the El Paso and Fort Bliss communities. In 2003, I deployed my brigade to Iraq as part of Operation Iraqi Freedom. When 9 of my soldiers were killed in combat, this community came together to comfort the families as well as the remaining soldiers. The outpouring of support would be just the beginning of what we all have experienced over the last 10 years of war. You've opened your homes, your businesses, and mostly your hearts to all military and their families. Saying thank you to all of you doesn't even come close to the enormity of what is in my heart. When the war started 10 years ago, you couldn't find too many people who even knew someone deployed. Fortunately or unfortunately, most people today have some type of connection to a soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, or civilian who has been deployed. Taking care of our own is where El Paso really shines. I have lived a lot of places around the country and around the world. No city comes close to El Paso in your support, not one. So I returned again to Fort Bliss in 2005 after a year in the Pentagon. I came back to serve initially as the Chief of Staff for then Major General Lennox, the post commander. I stayed for 3 years during that tour, which is actually very unusual to serve so long in a single location. It was fortuitous as my mother really needed my help in her last few years. Just like my father, I was there when she passed away. I'm grateful to have been stationed here, home in El Paso, during those difficult times. But those 3 years were also marked with many wonderful experiences and memories of my El Paso, such as participating in Veterans Day parades, Christmas tree lighting ceremonies downtown, sitting on the board of the Center Against Family Violence, serving on the board of the Armed Forces YMCA, working with the El Paso Chamber of Commerce, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and preparing Fort Bliss and the city of El Paso for the transformation of Fort Bliss from an air defense artillery-centric installation to an armored division headquarters and associated brigades. What an exciting time. The community kept doing more and more for our soldiers and families. As a matter of fact, with the base realignment and closure decision to move the Air Defense School to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, my deputy, Mr. John Pennington, and I asked the Chamber of Commerce from Lawton, Oklahoma, to come down to El Paso and meet the Chamber of Commerce here. We felt that they needed to see what our El Paso was doing for its sons and daughters. It was a decision that has paid dividends over and over again. When the opportunity arose to memorialize our parents, the Brown children decided that this was the right thing to do. This was their El Paso. Because of my parents, it is our El Paso. After my father passed away, my mother submitted my father's name and a biography on him for a veterans clinic being named. She was a bit disappointed when he wasn't selected, but this would be yet another reason why we decided that memorializing both parents was so important. They poured their lives into the city, its youth through teaching, working with the Parks and Recreation, and of course through all of us. We are so fortunate that their legacy now lives on through the William George and Virginia Maxwell Brown Center for Pediatric Audiology Development and Learning, which is located in the new El Paso Children's Hospital. The center focuses on follow-up care for children with hearing loss. and provides a developmental home for the indigent children in our care for whom timely follow-up care may make the difference in success in life. Having a hospital dedicated to the care of children speaks volumes of the true character of this city's citizens. I love telling people that I'm a Texan. People often can't tell because I don't have an accent, or at least not much of one. So the normal next question is, what city are you from? And I proudly tell people I'm from El Paso. I love everything about being from here: the people, the history, the culture, the climate, the mountains, and the desert. There is such a beauty to the desert. I distinctly remember the deluge of rain we got in the summer of 2006, when I think we received 2 years' worth of the city's average rainfall in about 3 days. After the rain, the blooming desert was the most colorful I had ever seen it. It was absolutely gorgeous. I'm certain that I'm in the twilight of my career. I have somewhere between 3 and 6 years remaining on active duty. It has been a tremendous journey, one that I will cherish forever. I have never been one to focus on regrets and believe that you should try to never regret a single decision, turn, or path in this life. While I don't know exactly where my journey will take me next, I do know this: it started here in my El Paso. I love the city, and its influence on my life has been profound. I am the person I am today because of your love and support over the years. Thank you very much for inviting me to join you tonight, and thank you for all you do for our military and their families, especially your generous support of the Fort Bliss Wounded Warrior Battalion. I'll see you in El Paso soon. Thank you, and good night.
This program is made possible in part by a grant from the Hunt Family Foundation of El Paso, Texas. This program is made possible in part by a grant from Humanities Texas, the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and by the El Paso County Historical Commission. By Maury and Jean Kemp, and by Capstone Productions, Inc.
Hello from the White House. Thanks for joining me for a look at Tom Lee's El Paso. My mother grew up in El Paso, and one of my happy childhood memories is taking the train from Midland to El Paso and seeing the silhouette of the Juarez Mountains and Mount Franklin with the lights of El Paso in the distance. In this program, Tom describes his experience growing up in El Paso and the places and people that gave meaning to his life, especially Mount Franklin and his father, Mayor Tom Lee Sr. Tom's painting, Rio Grande, has hung in the Oval Office for President Bush to see every day. This work of art shows Tom's love for his desert home and for the river that formed the Pass of the North. Tom Lee was a great artist, a great Texan, and for 8 years his painting has provided a warm reminder of home. President Bush and I thank the city of El Paso for loaning Rio Grande to the White House. When we return to Texas, we look forward to seeing Tom's painting in the El Paso Museum of Art once again. And now we'll hear from Tom in his own words. Here's Tom Lee's El Paso.
This is Tom Lee Park, It overlooks the neighborhood where Tom Lee grew up as a young boy during the turbulent years of the Mexican Revolution. His father was mayor of El Paso then, and Pancho Villa threatened to kill Mayor Lee and kidnap his two sons. That's one of the stories he tells in this rare TV conversation, recorded when he was 92 years old, a year before he died. It was a privilege to know and work with Tom Lee, and it is a privilege to share this conversation with you. Was your dad a friend of General Pershing's?
Yes, indeed. I remember as a boy one time, General Pershing had a Sunday dinner at our house, and he came with his aide, who was a great guy named Lieutenant Michaelis. And Lieutenant Michaelis invited me to come and spend the night in his tent down in Camp Cotton, which I did. Oh, and that was a great thing. Dad and Pershing maintained their correspondence, I think, until late in Pershing's life, long after he'd come back from the American Expeditionary Force. He was a very, very dignified man, and he did write me one letter. When he got over in France, Dad was writing, and he said, "Why don't you write General Pershing and wish him well?" And I did. I still have the letter. It says something about how he's sorry I wasn't a little older. He thought I'd make a good soldier. Let's see, this was in 1916. I was 9 years old. You don't think that pumped me up pretty good? And of course, kids like that, we all had soldier suits, you know, and I had a soldier hat and everything. But to get back to early El Paso, I think that El Paso was, when I was conscious of what it was like, was perhaps a unique city. For instance, all the time during the teens, the Mexican Revolution raged, and thousands of refugees came out of Mexico. Thousands were killed, and the troubles, disease, and the influenza, and so on. So it was a very unsettled place, and yet very somehow tranquil. And it seems to me that, for instance, what other city can say that in the 20th century, in the 1900s, there was artillery fire over their city, and serious artillery fire? It makes an impression on a kid. I was 12 years old. And of course, Dad had no liking at all, and it was quite mutual with Pancho Villa. And he ran into Pancho Villa back across the river one time. He and Bill Greet, his chief of police, went down and told Villa to get on the other side of the river, and he did. And so Villa offered $1,000 pesos resguardo oro for the dead or alive, the body of the Presidente Municipal of El Paso. And that proved something that he couldn't get. dead or alive. So he had one of his Dorados write about every week for a few weeks, threatening letters threatening to kidnap me and my little brother Joe. And so we had a policeman that would take us to school and be there waiting. There's Lamar School down on Montana Street, a walking distance. He would walk with us to school and then walk with us on our way home. And when things got real hot, and one of those times when V had come up from Chihuahua and was taking horrors again, why, a policeman, stayed at our house all night, every night, armed, and Mother put a folding army cot in the living room for him. And I don't know how long he stayed awake, but he was there every night for quite a while. Villa never came back to El Paso after that defeat he suffered in 1919. That was when Felipe Angeles, who had been living here waiting after the Battle of Celaya, when Obregon won, why the balance changed and Villa was no longer the big guy. Carranza was no longer the big guy, really, although Obregon was supporting Carranza at the time. Later, a little trouble down in one of the little mountain towns where they managed to knock off Carranza, just like they managed to knock off Villa outside of Parral. And that was in 1921 or something.
You always lived at the base of the mountain, kind of. You've always lived.
It's kind of. I know Mother told me that she could look out of the window of Hotel Dieu, where I was delivered, or where she stayed after my delivery, and see Mount Franklin from Hotel Dieu. And then we lived on Nevada Street in two addresses, 1316 and then 1400 Nevada Street. It was right under the mountain, always visible there, and particularly visible from my room in the north side of the house. And then I went away, and when I came back, why, I had a place on the North Stanton Street on the third floor in an apartment house. And there was Mount Franklin. And we used to, Sarah and I, when we were first married, used to walk a lot along Rim Road, and there was Mount Franklin. And we got the house out on Reynolds Boulevard, and right out my skylight, why, there was Mount Franklin. And we moved here, and we are on the side of Mount Franklin, and it's a kind of a thing that has been with me always, and I think it will be until the day I die. Hope so.
When the Texas writer J. Frank Dobie visited Tom, he said, "Tom, you don't even have a tree in your yard." And Tom responded, "You don't have a mountain in yours." Tom wrote, "Sarah and I live on the east side of our mountain. It is the sunrise side, not the sunset side. It is the side to see the day that is coming, not the side to see the day that is gone. The best day is the day coming, with the work to do, with the eyes wide open, with the heart grateful."
My favorite thing about Mount Franklin is something that I read in one of the poems of Carl Sandburg, whom I've always admired as a poet and as a biographer of Abraham Lincoln. But he said in one of the poems,
A mountain, Carl Sandburg says, is something that's fastened down, something you can count on. By that token, a mountain is a talisman in our hearts. In looking at Mount Franklin up there, we lift our eyes toward the sky.
Words from El Paso's Tom Lee. Now, the time has come, as it has each year since 1941, for you to look to the mountain as they light the star.
Carl Wilder was a good friend, and Connery Bryson worked for him there at KTSM Radio. And they said the electric company, they're going to light a star on the mountain for the Christmas holidays. Be like a star on a tree, only this will be a star on the mountain. And we want you to say something about your feelings toward the mountain. You're a native here. And then we'll turn the lights on. And the lights will stay on until after New Year's. Then after the war, why, Irwin Wills, who was the head of the electric company, said, well, we'll keep it going at Christmas time. And they did. They kept me on the program, and that's when I wrote the text that a few years later, after I had delivered the thing at Christmas time for several years, Carl Herzog printed a beautiful little book, Old Mount Franklin, I called it. And that's how it got recorded. And now I feel sort of sad that that star is on every day and nobody even notices it anymore. It's just a light up there on the mountain. But when it used to denote Christmas time, it seemed to me it was of much more significance.
Thank you for watching Tom Lee's El Paso.
Dear Margo, I'm the president of the Tom Lea Institute, and thank you all so much for joining us tonight for My El Paso. Wasn't it fantastic? I want to invite you to our other Tom Lea activities, including the display of fashion by a young El Pasoan, soon to be El Pasoan from Juarez, named Zaira Estrada, that are being displayed in the Mills building right next door. They're all inspired by Tom Lee's landscapes and the landscape of our beautiful Southwest. And probably you noticed this dress she made for me is inspired by that pointy yucca in the foreground of Rio Grande, which was a painting of Tom Lee's, which was in the Oval Office of the White House for 8 years on loan from the El Paso Museum of Art. There are many activities. I hope you'll go to Google and look up Tom Lee Month 2012. You can learn about the Santa Rita oil well. Paul Foster will talk about it and how it established the UT and Texas A&M systems. Tom Lee illustrated a book on the Santa Rita oil well. Tomorrow at Fort Bliss, we'll have an Art of War conference looking at Tom Lee's World War II work. There'll be an Art in Airplanes event at the War Eagles Museum on Sunday. And the White House pastry chef, Roland Mesnier, will be speaking on serving 5 presidents at the White House. For George W. Bush, he made a cake with this of the Oval Office with this painting in it. So you'll get to hear Roland Mesnier. So we invite you to join all those activities. Of course, I want to mention too that tonight Tom Lee's granddaughter, Catherine Lee Weeks, is with us in the audience. She's a member of the Tom Lee Institute board. Catherine, welcome. We're so glad to have you. And our Tom Lea Institute board that is comprised of Laura Bush, who could not be here, but our other members, Jan Bullock from Austin, I know is here, and Jamie Clement is here, chairman of the King Ranch. Mickey Costello, whose husband was Jack Costello, who was mentioned by Kay Bailey Hutchison, is here. So I know I'm missing some other, stand up our board of directors, if you will. But of course, none of this would be possible without the support of our wonderful, generous sponsors. The El Paso Electric Company, the National Endowment for the Humanities, Humanities Texas, J.P. and Mary John Bryan, Texas Monthly, Bill and Ann Kiley, Dan and Joanne Longoria and Mattress Firm. Did you see our billboard on I-10? Betty Ruth Wakefield Haley, the Hunt Family Foundation, AT&T, Casa Ford Lincoln Nissan, the El Paso Times, Las Palmas del Sol, the City of El Paso Museums and Cultural Affairs Department, Western Refining, City Private Bank, West Star Bank, and the Convention and Visitors Bureau of El Paso. We're grateful to them. I also, before we close, there are people who serve our city in Austin, and I do know, I saw earlier, Marissa Marcus and Joe Pickett. I want to thank them for being here as well. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you at the rest of Tom Lea's events during the month of October. Good night.